Hi there folks, in today's demonstration I want to show you how we can populate different document templates from a Power App using Power Automate. So if you're looking to populate, say, a Word document or maybe an Excel or indeed an HTML template, then I have each of those three scenarios covered in today's demonstration. Not only that, I'll show you how we can convert those files into PDFs, but also if you'd rather create a brand new Excel file with a table of data that you capture from your Power App, we've got that covered too. And finally, a text CSV file. So quite a few different scenarios in one video. Now I'll make available the solution to download so that you can try this out for yourself. And I'll also include links to other video demos that I've done that will cover some of these scenarios in more detail, albeit generically using the manual trigger. So if you haven't already, make sure you've liked and subscribed, and without further ado, let's jump into my demonstration. So here we are in my Power App, and the purpose of this is to enable me to first search for a customer, provide an invoice reference, and then start adding products and quantities, because today I would like to show you how I'm going to create an invoice. So that invoice is all based on a template, and each of those templates are based on either Word, Excel, or HTML. So I'll go ahead and add some products here. We'll add in 4 bottles of wine, maybe a couple of crates of beer. We'll go for some cheese, and finally maybe some flour. And so here we go, we've got all our items in a collection, and I'll be able to pass this collection of data as well as all these dynamic values for the name, address, city and phone through to our flow. So before I hit this create documents button, which will of course trigger my flow to create those documents, I thought we'll quickly have a look at these templates. So the first one is an Excel template, and this was available from office.com as part of the templates that they have there, and all I've done is built an Office script. So I do have a video on this in more detail, but for now this is what the template looks like, and this is what we're going to complete based on that data that I've captured in my Power App. If I jump across onto Word, you'll see again that I have a template sales receipt this time. And again, we have dynamic fields for the date, the invoice number, and some of the customer information, as well as a repeating control for the individual lines. I have a video on repeating controls, so if that's something you're interested in, please make sure you have a look at that description. Finally, we have the HTML template, which is not so easy to show you, but I'm going to go ahead into my Power App and I'm going to start my flow. Let's have a look at the flow. So very quickly, albeit I will cover this in more detail later on in the video, we have a trigger, Power Apps version 2. We have a compose, which allows me to access all those order lines, and the parse JSON, which allows me to access those order lines dynamically. Then you'll see that I have 5 scopes. Each of those scopes contain the actions that are required in order to create those files. So the Word one is based on premium actions, but that's purely because of the repeating control. If you'd rather do it using standard connections, I do have a video on how to do that, and as long as you don't have a repeating control, it's quite possible that you could implement that within your solution. I have the Excel for script one, the HTML one, the new Excel file, which doesn't require anything, albeit standard connectors, and the create CSV. Now each of these are independent of each other, and if you wanted to copy any of these for any of your solutions, all you need to worry about is what's contained within each of these scopes, and I'll go through each of them in more detail. So jumping across onto my email, I see that my flow has run and it has sent me each of those files. So we have the customer details, the invoice number, and those 4 lines, the 4 bottles or crates of wine and beer, cheese and flour, and we can see our subtotal, which includes VAT, which is 20% in the UK here, so £102. If I go into the Excel variant, again we can see all that dynamic content and £102. And if we jump into Word, again all that dynamic content, their contact details here, their order lines, and £102. I also mentioned that I would do a CSV, so this is just plain text, comma separated values. It opens up in Excel, but there we go. And if I jump into my SharePoint document library, not only will you see all the documents that have been created, including the Word and the Excel versions prior to being converted into PDFs. You can maybe have a quick look there at the Excel version there. I also have the brand new Excel file, which is postfixed with new Excel. And if I jump into that, you can see that we have a brand new Excel table with each of those rows, which would enable us to access that data natively within Power Automate using list rows, for instance. So how does that all come together? So the Power App is all based on, first of all, like I say, selecting a customer, typing in some of the values like invoice number, and we're pulling through the customer details from a SharePoint list. When it comes to those individual items, I'm adding them to a collection. So each time I hit add to order, they're added to a collection. And of course, when I hit create documents, I'm running a flow. So the add to order button is simply collecting order lines, and you can see I've specified there the key values. So we have the quantity, the item number, the description, the unit price, and the line total. And these are the values that I'm going to use dynamically within my Power Automate flow. The create document, of course, will, as well as handling validation and other items, will call my flow to run. And if we jump down onto this little button here on the left hand side for Power Automate, we can see that I have this flow attached to my Power App called create documents via Power App. And that's why we have this expression here, create documents via Power App.run. So contained within these brackets, we have our parameters. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The one that I really want to call out is this one here, which is wrapped in JSON, which is our collection. So by wrapping it in JSON, we can pass this whole collection across to Power Automate as an array and access these values dynamically. So I've called out all the different controls here that enables me to pass through all these different values, things like the invoice date, which I've converted into British format. We have the street address, the phone number, etc. And then if I jump into my flow and we start at the top with the trigger, you can see that I have all these input parameters defined here, including our order lines. So it's imperative, if you haven't noticed already, to use the Power Apps version 2 trigger. Our compose is just based on a single expression, which is JSON with the trigger body of what's called text7, which happens to be the order lines. So by wrapping it in JSON, it means that we can access all of this data for our order lines from our collection that came across from Power Apps as an array. And then by using parse JSON, if you watch some of my videos, I do a lot of expression building. I don't tend to use parse JSON, but for ease, I've put the input from this or output from this compose into this parse JSON. I've generated from a sample using a sample array from this compose action, and then that allows me to access each of those values dynamically. So on to each of these scopes individually. Let's have a look at how each of these files are created. So our scope for creating Word is based on a select, populating a template, creating a copy of that completed file, converting that file into a PDF, and then creating a copy of that PDF file. If we have a quick look at the Word template, I've used individual controls here, text controls for things like the date, the invoice number, and the name. You'll notice that they're all individually named. So if I click on the properties there, we can see that one there is called street address. And we also have a repeating control, which if I can highlight is called invoice lines. And within that, we have the item number, the unit price, and also the line total. This is a bit more complex, but there is a video showing you how to do it. I'm not going to go over it in great detail here. I'm going to jump back onto my flow now, and we're going to just run through each of these actions. So I've actually got another tab open here. I'm going to quickly fire up the history, because I think it'd be worthwhile having a look at the history side by side to try and understand what's actually going on. So our select is all based on getting the values for quantity, item number, unit price, and line total in this new structure. This is all based on the format of our repeating table here. So we have those 4 columns, and therefore our select is repurposing the data with new key names and the values, of course. When it comes to populating the word template, we're just supplying those individual dynamic values into that populate a word template action. Some of those have been formatted. There are calculations being done as well. You can see there's a calculation there done on VAT by multiplying it by 0.2 in order to get the 20% rate. And I'm also using format number to give me that string in the format with 2 decimal places. The invoice lines, which is the name of that repeating control, is this array, which is using this select. And we then have the rest of our dynamic values, including another format number on a calculation. The creating document, and you'll notice this throughout, I am using the invoice number to create a unique file name. So we're using that invoice number to postfix the word.docx, and it's important to always include that file extension, and we're simply using the body from this action here, from this populator template. In order to create a PDF, I'm using the existing convert word to PDF action, and I'm simply taking the existing file that we've created there to convert it into PDF, and finally create a PDF version of that file using the body from the output above. So again, don't forget the file extension, but that has given us both the docx version and the PDF version of the file. If we have a quick look at the run history, we can open this up here, have a look at select for word. So we can see the original array, which includes 5 different key objects: description, item number, line total, quantity, and unit price. But the repurposed version here has got the quantity, item number, unit price, and line total. So it's all about repurposing that data to suit the requirements of our Word templates. The rest of it is pretty straightforward: populating, creating, converting, and then saving a copy of that conversion. So it is possible to potentially do all of this without the premium actions. I chose the premium actions because of the repeating control. I do have a video on how to use standard connectors in order to populate a Word template. If you don't have repeating controls, it's possible for you to explore that option for your particular scenario. Moving on to Excel Office scripts. So this one's slightly more complicated, but not as complicated as it seems. I have a video on this in more detail, but the purpose here of the first action, get file content using path, is to grab that template invoice file that we saw earlier. So we have that template invoice, and I'm simply grabbing a copy of that content so that we're not upsetting the content of that file. Then I'm creating a unique copy of that file, which of course will still have the generic information in it. And I'm using the select action again. So very much like the Word scenario, I need to repurpose that data, because if I don't repurpose it, it's not going to match with my Excel Office script. And things to note are, for instance, quantity, item number. These names or key names are very important. And if we look at the Office script very quickly, we can see that we have quantity, item number, description. This is the structure that we're trying to create using our select here. When it comes to running the script, we select the file by ID, which is from this create file here. And then again, we're just simply providing that dynamic content that's come from our trigger. You'll notice that some of the strings here are just fixed. That's just where I've been lazy and chosen not to make it all dynamic. But the same idea applies. If you've got a reason to make these values dynamic, you can go ahead and do that. The sales lines here are all based on this select array. So that's why we've used select to pass this array of the 4 lines, or however many lines have been selected in our Power App. Once that script's run, the file is updated, and then in order for me to create a PDF version, I don't have the option to do that within SharePoint. So I'm going to get a copy or the content of that existing file, which will now be all updated. I'm going to create a copy of that file on my OneDrive, and you'll notice that I've used this GUID expression here to create a unique file name. I'm then converting that file into a PDF. To keep things tidy, I'm deleting that file from my OneDrive, and then I'm simply creating a brand new version of that file with the PDF extension using the body from this convert file action above. If we have a quick look at the run history, nothing particularly exciting about the first two actions here. We can see the select again. We're simply repurposing that data. So where we had QTY for quantity, we now have the word quantity. Item number is another example. Look, item number is now item number. And so that's what the whole purpose of the select is about, is to repurpose that data so it's suitable for the particular solution we're using right here, right now. The run script, all we'll see is all that dynamic content being passed across, including that array of sales lines. And then if I have a look at some of these other actions, again, nothing of great interest here. The creation, the conversion, the deletion, and then the creation of the file on SharePoint. Let's have a look at the next solution. So creating an HTML file, you won't be surprised to see that, again, I'm using a select, but this time it's based on strings. So with HTML, of course, we have tags, and for a table row, I have this TR and a closing TR for a table row. And if I've got 4 individual lines, I need to have 4 individual table rows. And then you'll notice I have these TD tags for the data. And within that, I have these expressions. So I've got item quantity, item number, I've got description, unit price, etc. And this is how I built up the map. So when you're using the select, again, the output is taken from my original JSON array from the compose at the top of my solution. And then I'm using concat to create this string of table rows. Make sure you've got the text feature on here, and then you can build out this expression that includes things like this dynamic content. Once we've got this select, we're going to end up with however many objects of strings, and I think at this point it's probably worth jumping across into the history to try and make some sense. So we've started with an object like one of these here with a description, item number, line number, etc. And all we're doing for each of them is building out a string of HTML with those data tags, the table row tags, and those values in the correct place based on our column structure of our table. Once we've created that select, the next action is all of the HTML. So I've used W3 Schools to build out a very basic HTML table, which is the format you saw in my email. So if I jump into my email and bring up that HTML table here. So I built this using W3 Schools with a series of columns, individual tables. As you can see here, I've got 3 different tables, and then the dynamic element of it in the select is all based on these 4 individual rows. So within my HTML, I have the dynamic values for the name, the invoice number, customer, etc. And I've placed them into the correct place within the table data tags. And then I have this repeating section here, which is based on the expression join. So our select is of course an array of individual strings, and I want to join those strings. Normally you put a delimiter, but because I put nothing between the single quotes, all I'm getting is one continuous long string of all of those individual lines. So all 4 lines will be brought together to complete a single string. Further down, I'm using format number and multiplication of that value, the total order number, to work out things like VAT and the total again down the bottom here. So very much like I've done in the Word solution. But this basically builds out my HTML, and then I can create that HTML file. I've chosen to do it on OneDrive because, again, I'm using that conversion to convert it into PDF, and then I'm saving that PDF file on my SharePoint site. And just for completeness, here is how I've created that HTML file. I've used the GUID expression again to create a unique reference for that particular file. The file content is based on that compose. I convert it and I create the PDF version. On to the next solution. So this one is all about creating a brand new Excel file, no template. We want to take the data that we've saved in that collection and save it into a new Excel file. So again, I have a video on this solution. You can use Office scripts. I've chosen not to, and I'm using just the native actions, and it won't be as efficient. So if you have a massive selection of data, you will have potentially efficiency problems, but you could use an Office script to write all the data as an array in bulk. But that's for another day. There are plenty of videos on my YouTube showing how to do that. This particular solution is based on a compose action that contains the file content of an empty file. Now, natively, you cannot create a new Excel file using Power Automate as things stand. So, if you watch my video, I show you how you can get the file content of a blank Excel file and place that into a compose. Now, why would you do that? Well, my particular thinking is if you've placed a blank file on a SharePoint site that you're using as a template and someone comes along and deletes it because they go, why have I got a blank file here? Your flow will stop working. So there is no dependency on that blank file anymore because you have that file within a compose. Then all I do is create a blank version of that file using the output from that compose above. And we have a brand new Excel file with that standard file format or file name. Then I've got some particularly bizarre things that will make sense in a minute. I have the alphabet A to Z, which is based on all those columns A to Z in a SharePoint or Excel sheet, sorry. I have a create CSV table, which I'm using in order to get the header. Again, this will make sense shortly. I have a compose header compose action, which is using a split. And all I'm doing here is I'm splitting the CSV that's been created on the JSON on a return line. So the URI component that you see there is the equivalent of a return line. It allows us to create an array, and you'll note that I have the question mark 0 in brackets. That returns object 1 or object 0 because they start from 0, which is the header row. I then have another expression here, which is based on a substring. We're taking this alphabet string that we have here, and we are getting the letter based on the position of the length of our header and returning that first string. I'm going to have a look at the history because this is where it'll make more sense. So if we jump into the history for this particular solution, the compose, straightforward. We know that's the file content. We've created a file. Our alphabet that we have here is straightforward. Then we have the create the table. So we've taken that JSON output. We've created a table here with all that data. But what I need here is just that top line. So in order to get that top line, I've returned it here in my compose header using that split expression. So I'm splitting on a return line, which will give me an array of all of these individual lines. And then I'm selecting object 0, which allows me to return that top line. Composing a letter, I know that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is A, B, C, D, E. So I've got the letter E. Where does this all feature? The next action, create a table. So when it comes to creating a table, we have to have a table range. It's from A1 to E1 based on this composing letter. And the column names need to be a string of column names, which of course we've created here using this compose header. So hopefully all that now makes sense. And then we have an apply to each. So this is the inefficient method, adding a row into a table one by one. You could use Office scripts. We know that we have a new table. The only thing of great interest here is that we have this row parameter. Traditionally, when you're using add a row into a table, you see each of those column names, but we don't have that now. We need to supply an array or an object, and so we're using this array in an apply to each, and we're passing the current item, which is each of those objects, which will then add that data into our Excel sheet. So if we have a quick look at what that might look like, actually I need to jump to the very top, I think, to show you. So we're going to pass the whole array into the apply to each, and then the current item is going to be equal to everything in these squiggly brackets, so an individual object. So each of these rows will get created one by one because the apply to each will return the current item, which is everything between each of those squiggly brackets. So that gets our Excel file created with a new table. Finally, creating a CSV file. So just to keep things interesting, I added in a select. I didn't need to use a select. If all I wanted to do was output all of those values into a CSV, I could quite easily just pass the output from that JSON at the top straight into our create CSV, but I thought it'd be interesting to add another property. So you'll see that I've used an expression here to add a new column called Invoice ID, which is just based on that dynamic value that I passed in the invoice ID. So that just creates me a new array with that new value, and when I pass it into the create CSV table, I can create a new file here and pass the output of that CSV table into that create file action. If I look at what that looks like in my flow quickly, we can see that I have taken the original array, which has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 individual key values, and then if we look at the output, we can see that we now have that invoice ID. And that's why when we jump into that email and we have a look at, let's go and grab it, that CSV file, that we have a column for invoice ID. If I hadn't used that select, I would have just returned this as a CSV. So that marks the end of my demonstration. We've seen how we can populate 3 different document templates in Word, in Excel, and in HTML, as well as creating a brand new Excel file, and of course that comma separated values text file. I hope you've learnt loads from it, and I will make available the solution to download as promised, links to my other videos that might help you in the description, and also I'll include both the invoice templates in Word and Excel, and of course an export from my customers list, so that you should be able to create that list in SharePoint and get up and running with that solution. If there are any questions, make sure you leave them in the comments below, and if you haven't already, please make sure that you like and subscribe. Thanks very much for watching, and hope to see you again sometime soon. Cheers.